We think that the world has actually been quite stable over the past 74 or so years since the end of World War II. We think that probably the main reason for that is that the United States, in collaboration with other victorious powers in that war, was successful in creating a whole architecture of international organizations that were optimized for resolving international conflicts, sometimes preventing those international conflicts from happening even before they arise, sometimes stopping them when they are just nascent. And we also think that these same international organizations are the vehicles for the kind of dynamic international cooperation that saw the 20th century the fastest advancement economically in terms of growth, not just for the United States, but worldwide. We think that this is a claim that stands very much in tension with the kind of universe that they seem to want to live in, right? They seem to want to take us back to 1919, to the League of Nations, when the United States withdrew its leadership from what was the precursor of the UN. Similar principle, let's get all the nations who are legitimate independent nations as members of this organization. Without US leadership, what happened? The League of Nations failed completely to stop conflicts happening in Italy, Japan, and ultimately in Germany. We think that's the substantive consequence, the empirical example of what happens when US leadership is taken away from international organizations that need its unique combination of strong resources and strong values. We don't think that their alternative, when they conceded that China's going to take over, right, which is what they said, it's really cool because it helps us a lot, that's going to be a much worse world in which to live, because China is fundamentally different in terms of the norms and values that it represents. And it represents those values in terms of how it treats its own people. So if it were to become the number one in international organizations tends to set the agenda, tends to set the sort of rules and regulations by which behavior, treatment between international states is conducted. That seems to generalize a rather harmful logic onto the future interactions that will take place, mediated by any China-led international order, international institutions, and international system. But that's the world that they want. We want to maintain the stable status quo. And we recognize that one of their claims is quite interesting. They say that US power can't solve China's problems that we have. In the long run, China's rise is inevitable, it will take over anyway. Obviously, again, it's a concession that China will fill this power vacuum, which is a claim that we're very worried about the implications of. But we also think that it's very dangerous to take this kind of position. If China becomes number one, it establishes norms, we oppose those norms. That is sufficient justification to seek to oppose their rise. But we also think, probably they've never studied international relations, whereas I unfortunately studied it, wasted my time for 6 years. And I think that there's a very important concept called deterrence that they completely overlook. Because they seem to say, well, it doesn't matter if the US is there. It matters a lot, right? It matters a lot if China, when it thinks about, are we going to build a bigger artificial island, or are we going to fire on the Philippines and try and take their sovereign territory, is the US going to intervene under its treaty obligations, or has that treaty disappeared because they've had to institutionalize isolationist preferences that prevent US resources being committed automatically to Philippine interests, when that would lead to the shedding of US blood on foreign soil? We think that that's the kind of world in which they want to live. Again, where those value commitments are completely abrogated, where the Chinese power logic, which seems to be very clearly might means right, that's the kind of world in which they want to live. They also tell us about, again, the interest of US citizens. They never engage with my response, right? When the US is a global leader, everyone wants to engage with the United States. It's the most dynamic, largest, most successful, diverse economy in the world. And it has the power to set the terms of trade, and it has the power to engage with trade agreements, free trade agreements, that benefit its people, sometimes disproportionately. It's better for them when the US leaves the international system rather than when it takes a back seat. Finally, they say, well, US interventionism has always been selfish, right? And that's a really big problem. But we think that the recent pattern in history suggests that the US has always acted in concert with the interests of other like-minded powers. So the US was joined by the United Kingdom in the invasion of Iraq, Syria and Libya when it launched airstrikes, it did so working with European powers as well. And they seem to think that if European powers, who are presumably who they're talking about when they say multilateral interventions are okay, if they can sanction an intervention, why can't the US? The European powers seem happy to work with the United States. We also think that occasionally the US does do the wrong thing. We agree. Iraq turned out to be a disaster. At least it does these things for the right reasons. It does these things based on a principled commitment to values that we support in terms of the individual autonomy of every human being, human rights to which they should be entitled, the dignity that they have, and China stands as the antithesis of all of those protections. That's why we genuinely oppose.